Welcome everyone to WarThunder Histories, episode 23, and today we're looking at the somewhat lesser known post-World War II aircraft, the AM-1 Mauler. As always, we'll talk about its design and development, its relatively short service history, lack of combat action, and of course how it performs in-game. I hope you enjoy. During the 1930s and early 1940s, the United States Navy, much like most navies, operated carrier-based bombers in two distinct types, the torpedo bomber and the dive bomber. As you can probably guess, the torpedo bomber would drop a torpedo in the water to try and blow holes in a ship below the waterline, whilst dive bombers would descend from high altitudes and somewhat accurately drop bombs on a target such as the deck of an enemy ship. These aircraft came in various forms, with varying crew numbers anywhere from 2 to 3 men on dive bombers and up to 3 or 4 men on torpedo bombers. During the early years of World War II, the US Navy began to realise pilots didn't actually need the additional crewmen to assist in releasing ordnance, nor did they require the additional crewmen to navigate back to their aircraft carriers with the newer addition of radio direction finders. Equally, as aircraft became faster and more manoeuvrable, the need for defensive gunners became less necessary since the bomber could simply outrun enemy aircraft or equally just fight them as well as fighters. Then in 1943, the United States Navy invited proposals for a new multi-purpose single-seat bomber to increase carrier groups' strike capability by removing the need to carry 2 or more different types of aircraft. Then in September of 1943, the US Navy selected 4 proposed designs for evaluation. Of the 4 designs, Curtiss submitted the XBT-C, Douglas submitted the XBT-2D, which would later become the legendary A-1 Sky Raider, Kaiser Fleet Wings submitted the XBT-K, and finally Martin submitted the XBT-M. The Martin design was selected as the backup for the XBT-C design by Curtiss, which was the proposed replacement for the SB-2C Helldiver, also designed by Curtiss. The US Navy was skeptical of the new Curtiss design due to its complexity and the poor track record from the Helldiver's development. Martin was instructed to create an unexperimental design using only tested and proven design components whilst also being powered by the powerful Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Major radial engine, which produced near 3,000 horsepower. The Martin design, internally designated as Model 210, was ordered by the US Navy on May 31, 1944, with 2 prototypes being designated the XBTM-1. The XBTM-1 was a low-wing, all-metal monoplane with a hydraulically folding wing, with the inner section of the wing consisting of a 2-spar structure with a 180-gallon or 680-litre fuel tank in the wing root, along with a 3-spar outer section separated by a hydraulic hinge for the wing folding to maximise the stowage aboard aircraft carriers. The wings also held the aircraft's fixed armament of 4 20mm T-31 autocannons along with the 200 rounds of ammunition per gun. The trailing edge of the wing had a large dive brake that would, when closed, have intermeshing fingers and could act as a set of flaps in a conventional sense, with their large surface area making them immensely effective. However, this came at a cost, meaning that the ailerons were relatively small and were relatively ineffective at lower speeds. As previously mentioned, the aircraft was powered by the enormous Pratt & Whitney R4360, with 297 pounds of armour behind it to protect the pilot and air cooler. Then behind the pilot was another steel plate and another fuel tank able to hold 150 gallons or 570 litres of fuel. All the aircraft fuel tanks were self-sealing and with a total fuel amount of 510 gallons or 1,900 litres. The aircraft had multiple hardpoints to carry anything that basically the US Navy had available to it, such as bombs, rockets and torpedoes. The aircraft, much like many naval aircraft, was huge, with a wingspan of 50 feet or 15.24 metres and an overall length of 41 feet and 3 inches or 12.57 metres. The aircraft was also 16 feet and 10 inches tall, or 5.13 metres. The aircraft also used a 4-bladed 14-foot 8-inch propeller, or 4.47 metres. The XBTM-1 took its maiden flight on August 26, 1944. The US Navy, happy with the design, selected the Martin design alongside the Douglas design, ultimately rejecting the Curtiss and Kaiser Fleet Wings designs from consideration. The US Navy ordered a small number of Martin's XBTM-1s to begin flight testing at the Naval Air Test Center from December 11, 1944. Initial flight testing revealed a number of significant issues with the aircraft, notably the torque from the engine cowlings, and entire vertical stabilizer and rudder. These issues were relatively quickly resolved, with the engine cowling being lengthened by 6 inches or 152 millimeters. The engine was canted by 2 degrees to the right to counter torque. The carburetor air scoop was also lengthened, along with a full redesign of propeller spinner, rudder and vertical stabilizer. Following the initial issues being resolved, the US Navy ordered a further 780 aircraft on January 15, 1945, but the order was reduced to 99 following the Japanese surrender in August. With the redesign of the tail section still somewhat incomplete, the US Navy nevertheless christened the aircraft the AM-1 Mauler in April of 1946, whilst also changing the classification from bomber torpedo to attacker. First deliveries began in March of 1947, with flight testing beginning the same month. As flight testing went on, there was a number of relatively minor issues identified, such as the lack of roll control at lower speeds, which prompted the addition of spoilers on the upper part of the wings, along with the addition of elevator control boosters to improve pitch control. Unfortunately, as testing continued, the number of issues with the aircraft began to mount up. During carrier trials, it was noted that there was a critical weakness in the rear fuselage where one aircraft was torn in half when it landed relatively hard, prompting strengthening of the tail section. It was also noted that when the tailhook engaged with an arresting cable, the aircraft would vibrate violently, and so the tailhook was modified to use a roller bearing which would counter the lateral forces exerted during this engagement. The test period would last around 3 years, which would continue to find issues, most notably with the aircraft's hydraulic system leaking, which would never be fully fixed. The cockpit layout initially was also deemed unsatisfactory and was redesigned before August of 1948, where the Naval Air Test Centre finally approved the AM-1 for carrier landings. There is an important thing to note at this point, that although the Mauler was still ongoing testing as of August of 1948, by early 1948, VA-17A was already equipped with the AM-1 as an active squadron, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. Despite all the early negatives, there were a few firm positive aspects of the Mauler's design. Due to the aircraft's enormous dive brakes, the Mauler was an excellent dive bomber. This, coupled with its enormous bomb load, having carried 10,648 pounds of ordnance on March 30th, 1949, which earned the Mauler the nickname Able Mabel. This feat was also noted to be the largest ordnance load carried by a single-engine piston-powered aircraft to this point, which was a third more than the Skyraider's maximum load. As I mentioned earlier, the first operational AM-1 squadron was VA-17A, which was later redesignated VA-174 as a part of the United States Navy's Atlantic Fleet. VA-174 received 18 aircraft between March and April of 1948. The squadron began carrier qualification aboard USS Kearsarge in late December of 1948, completing them aboard USS Leyte in January of 1949. Pilots began to very quickly note that the Mauler was a very heavy-handling aircraft and was especially difficult to fly in formation. It was also noted the aircraft was surprisingly difficult to land aboard aircraft carriers, which was not really ideal for a carrier-based aircraft. Any less than perfect landing would often cause the aircraft's tailhook to bounce over the arresting cable, and as a result the aircraft meeting the safety barrier, quickly giving the aircraft the new nickname Awful Monster. During VA-174's time aboard USS Leyte, the squadron participated in the search for a British South American Airways Avro Tudor that had gone missing over the Caribbean. VA-174 then transferred to the Midway-class USS Midway for a brief deployment where, due to the increased deck space, the AM-1 was much easier to land. Upon the squadron's return to the US, the Maulers were transferred to VA-44 and VA-45, who had both been assigned to USS Midway in early 1949. VA-174 then converted to the Skyraider, but the squadron was later disbanded in January of 1950. VA-44 and VA-45 both began receiving further aircraft in March of 1949, and both squadrons began conducting their carrier qualification between the 2nd and 7th of May, with VA-45 being the only AM-1 squadron to complete carrier qualifications on the Mauler with no accidents. The squadrons had a short deployment between September 1st and September 9th, 1949, before they converted to the Skyraider in October. Back in September of 1948, Carrier Air Group 8, or CVG-8, had been established in response to the Berlin blockade with newly qualified pilots and volunteer reserves from VA-84 and VA-85 respectively, receiving their Maulers between November 1948 and January of 1949. The air group also made a flyover of President Harry Truman's inauguration ceremony in January of 1949. The air group began carrier qualifications on May 3rd, 1949, and completed them on May 6th, collectively having had 10 aircraft crash into the safety barrier after missing the cables. The air group also was later disbanded in November of 1949 following the peaceful resolution of the Berlin blockade. In 1950, the decision was made by the United States Navy to move all AM-1s to land-based airfields, operating them in the Naval Reserve until 1953. Although the Mauler had some advantages, the Skyraider would ultimately push it out of service, since most pilots preferred the Skyraider along with its much easier maintenance. In total, of the 782 Maulers ordered, only 131 were produced before their cancellation, with 18 being converted to the AM-1Q electronic warfare aircraft. However, not much is known about their use. However, they are believed to have stayed in service into the 1950s. All AM-1s were operated by the United States Navy. There was also a carrier onboard delivery variant designated JR2M-1 proposed but never produced. If you'd like to see an AM-1 Mauler, there are currently 2 on display in the US, with one at the National Naval Aviation Museum at Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida, and Tillamook Air Museum, Tillamook, Oregon. So how does the AM-1 perform in-game? The AM-1 is a Rank 4 battle rating 5.7 US Naval strike aircraft. With a crew of 1, the aircraft has a top speed of 366 miles per hour at 11,480 feet. The aircraft has a maximum altitude of 31,488 feet, Armour on the aircraft consists of 9.5mm steel plates around the pilot, behind him and under the engine, with a 40mm armoured windshield, with 4 20mm cannons with 2 in each wing, with the ability to carry a multitude of ordnance from 250-pound bombs to 2,000-pound bombs, HVAR rockets, Tiny Tims and torpedoes, or a mix of all of them. The aircraft can make a full turn in 22 seconds, only needing 558 feet of runway to take off. Obviously these stats are very dependent on fuel and bomb loads. Luckily, since War Thunder is a game, you don't have to suffer the real problems the aircraft had, and so it's a relatively easy aircraft to fly. However, at lower speeds the aircraft will be harder to handle and can stall very easily if your speed drops too low. I would recommend mostly playing this aircraft in a close air support role for tank RB games, making use of its exceptional bomb load. However, in air games it can be used relatively effectively in low altitude dogfights with its powerful 20mm guns. It is worth noting that the stall window for this aircraft is relatively small, and especially when landing you can enter a spin very easily, which is near impossible to get out of. Much like the AD-2 and AD-4 Sky Raiders, the AM-1 is a very easy to play in a ground attack role. I've had plenty of enjoyment using it, and it's a very effective aircraft to have in your tank lineup. I'd like to quickly thank COBRAREAPER and Sparky Cinematic for helping me gather this footage. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. If there's a vehicle or battle you'd like to see on the series, let me know in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe if you're new here and you like what we do. Thanks again everyone, and I will see you next time.